I am Michael Fallins, managing partner here at Tully Rinckey, and thank you all for joining us to discuss the government shutdown and its impact on the pending administrative cases with the EEOC and MSPB. On our screen here is my bio at our firm. As I just stated, I'm a managing partner with Tully Rinckey. I also chair our Federal Labor Employment Practice Group. I have years of experience litigating cases before the MSPB and the EEOC and in federal courts. I'm licensed in Washington, D.C., Texas, and Maryland. But we'll talk more about just the MSPB and EEOC statuses during the shutdown here today. Just overview of what we're going to talk about. What I just mentioned is the impact of the shutdown of the MSPB deadlines in those cases and what's going on there. And then similar with the EEOC, specifically like the EEOC hearings at the federal sector, we'll talk about the impact of the government shutdown there. We'll talk about the impact of the government shutdown on investigations of federal EEO complaints. Those complaints that are investigated by the agency at the agency level, but are governed by federal regulations. We'll talk about the impact of the shutdown there. In addition to disciplinary and investigations of federal employees. So how has disciplinary notices been impacted in investigations of federal employees? And we'll also talk about the federal courts and just whether there's been any impact there. Okay, so first, as far as an overview of just the agencies impacted by this shutdown. So when the government did officially shut down, agencies did provide notice on their websites of the impact. For the EEOC has stated that it is closed and the information on its website won't be updated during the shutdown. And that the EU staff will not respond to questions during the shutdown, and the items submitted on the website will not be processed. However, importantly, the EEOC public portal is available and open and available for submission. So those employees that need to submit documents can still do so on the public portal. The EEOC public portal is its online system for people outside of the federal government or people, non-government agency attorneys, so federal employees, to submit information for their cases. This is available for private sector individuals as well, but for federal sector, if you have a pending hearing with the EEOC, you could still submit documents on the EEOC public portal for your case. For the Merit Citizens Protection Board, the Merit Citizens Protection Board did cease all operations during the shutdown per its notice on its site. The e-appeal system is not available during the shutdown. So that means, per the notice, that all the processing of appeals and other pleadings and deadlines are suspended. Now, if you have an appeal due and you still want to get it submitted, you can still fax it to the MSPB. There won't be anybody there to process it, but at least, if you're at all nervous, if you have a deadline during the shutdown that you're worried about, you can still fax it to be safe. But they have shut down and only essential workers are working there for the MSPB. Before moving on federal courts, I want to note that the EEOC at least also indicated that judges, the administrative law judges, could issue orders that state how deadlines are operated. So I know of some administrative judges that actually issued orders even after the shutdown occurred to state how any current deadlines would be extended. And so if you have a current case, whether it's MSPB or EEOC, be sure to still look out for any email correspondence from a judge to see how the judge wants to treat any deadlines occurring. But the notices, at least from the EEOC, state that deadlines are suspended unless otherwise noted by the administrative judge. So for the federal courts are remaining open at least through this Friday by using available judiciary funds. This may continue, but they remain open. I know the federal sector or Federal Circuit Court of Appeals is also remaining open and still on schedule. So if you have a case in federal court or at the federal appeal level, those deadlines are still running. Now they may be extended if the case involves federal employees that are furloughed right now that aren't available to respond to discovery requests or appear at a trial or deposition. So a court may be willing to extend deadlines through an agency request or on their own, given the knowledge of that. But the courts do remain open. And it's up to the court's discretion to reschedule matters. So I want to talk more about the EEOC and the how the shutdown has impacted the EEOC hearings. I mentioned that the EEOC is not open right now. Like I mentioned, though, that administrative law judges do have more of a discretion here to reschedule hearings or reschedule deadlines. But if there was a hearing that you had that was going to occur during the shutdown, it's been postponed most likely, absent any kind of different direction from an administrative law judge, and will be rescheduled when the government opens back up. And that's the same for settlement conferences or initial conferences with the judge. They're not necessarily canceled. They're going to be postponed and rescheduled. As far as deadlines for submitting discovery or submitting motions or anything, if you had a deadline to serve discovery requests, to serve requests on, the government agency requesting information that occurred during the shutdown, that is postponed. However, if the deadline occurred before October 1st, then you still needed to meet that deadline. Now, if you did serve discovery requests because the deadline was before October 1st, and you received discovery requests from the government, and you normally have discovery responses due, those responses deadlines is likely extended as well. But the administrative judges may issue orders that modify those deadlines. That doesn't mean that you can't work on your discovery responses or cannot work on your discovery requests or cannot work on your cases. It's actually a great time to kind of get ahead of the government and draft discovery request that you think you need, to draft information you think you need, even if you haven't had an initial conference yet, because then you could tell the judge, well, this is what I think I need. This is not what's in the report investigation. Similar with discovery responses, if you have requests from the government, now you have more time to gather documents that the government has requested from you. If they've requested medical records, perhaps, and you believe you do need to produce those, you have more time to gather those, gather emails or correspondence, because normally you would only have 30 days, sometimes even shorter, to gather that information. Now with the shutdown, you have a longer amount of time. And the EEOC public portal is open. So it does not prevent you from filing motions if perhaps you think the government already produced responses to you in response to discovery requests, and you believe that they weren't they didn't produce all the documents that you requested. You could attempt to you could still contact the agency attorney, because some agency attorneys are still available, and you could attempt to have them produce those documents, and if they still refuse, you could still file a motion. Now, that motion may not be heard until the government is reopened, but you still have the opportunity to at least file a motion and have it on the record, so you don't have to rush and do it when the government reopens. Again, all the matters should be rescheduled when the government reopens. I think, though, it's important to kind of get ahead of everything, because and get past government shutdowns. When the government has reopened, then there's just an influx of deadlines. Sometimes judges even don't provide the correct deadlines. Sometimes they will say discovery's over when it really wasn't. So it's important to get ahead of everything. And then so you're very prepared to communicate with that administrative judge and the agency on the status of the matter when the government reopens. We'll talk about the MSPB, and it's going to be a similar vein to what I just discussed, the EEOC. Yes, the MSPB is shut down. If you've had a hearing or you had a hearing scheduled, it's likely going to be rescheduled. If you have a hearing that's scheduled next week and you haven't heard from the judge, likely it's going to be rescheduled. If the government's still shut down, if the government opens the day before, get in contact with the judge as soon as possible. Those hearings or status conferences are likely rescheduled, or if they've already passed, they've been rescheduled. So with deadlines, I think the main deadline individuals are probably concerned with is their deadline to appeal. So if you have received an adverse action that is appealable to the Mayor Assistance Protection Board, there's normally a 30-day deadline to file that appeal from the effective date of that adverse action. And if that deadline is occurring this month, I understand there's a concern about, well, I don't want to miss my deadline. Well, number one, the MSPB site has confirmed that all deadlines are suspended. During past shutdowns, and even when the MSPB was transitioning to its new e-appeal server, it did allow extensions of deadlines, and I expect the same here, given that we already have confirmation. But I understand, to be safe, and like I mentioned earlier, if you want to avoid any kind of issue, you can still file it via fax. You can fax it to the MSPB field office, and so you just have proof of filing. And I understand this could be an issue because, like I just said, when the government reopens, it's going to take administrative law judges to basically recalculate deadlines. So, for example, if you have an appeal due today, for example, and the MSPB shut down, and if you don't file and the government reopens in 2 weeks, the MSPB and the administrative law judges are still going to have to calculate when your appeal could be due. And that can become confusing, especially if you're not tracking that deadline. So I understand of just filing it now via fax to the MSPB if you'd like, if you have an appeal deadline. But otherwise, the appeal won't be processed until the government reopens. Pleading deadlines, meaning the discovery deadlines for the MSPB, are also suspended. Again, that you could still draft your discovery request. Now, you don't file a discovery request on the MSPB site, nor do you on the EEOC site, but you can still draft those discovery requests and have them ready to go when the government reopens. So you're not rushing to do it when the government reopens. As far as hearings, if you had a hearing that was supposed to be scheduled, I know it's disappointing that you can't be heard and it's right now and it's been postponed, but think of it as allowing more time to prepare for your hearing, to prepare your testimony, to prepare your witness's testimony, to ensure you have the proper documentation in place. Talk with your attorney, if you have one, to ensure that you have all that in place. So when the hearing, begins, you're fully prepared. Often when hearings occur, sometimes you're working on the last minute trying to figure out things. This gives you just more time. And if you filed an MSPB appeal and you just filed one and your hearing hasn't even been set, well, think of this even more time to prepare for your hearing. Think about what documents you need. Think about what witnesses you need you want to have testify. This just gives you a great and more opportunity, even with the disappointing rescheduling, to be able to be prepared for your hearing. So when the government reopens, these deadlines will be extended. These things will be rescheduled. But it's important to track that. What's happened before is the MSPB will, and similar with the EEOC, will post a notice about how long deadlines are extended, and that's usually by the length of the shutdown. So if the shutdown ended today, then we would be seeing it's October 16th, a 16-day extension likely. And sometimes that's hard to calculate though. So that's why it's good to just pay attention to that and just take care of whatever deadlines you have as soon as possible. As far as conferences are concerned, the MSPB will or should reschedule those conferences and set specific dates for those conferences, that you have. these extensions apply to all the deadlines, including at the petition for review. So if you've already had a whole hearing and you want to challenge the decision on your hearing, those deadlines have been extended as well. One thing to note here, and it's kind of out of scope of this presentation, but it is newsworthy, is that the MSPB does have a quorum now. So you may have heard in the news earlier this year that the MSPB did not have a quorum, which means that it didn't have the decision-making power to rule on cases. Administrative law judges have still processed cases, but there's a board of at most 3 individuals that could rule on cases, and it didn't have that requisite number of individuals. Now it does, at least has 2 individuals that does allow it to issue decisions. So if you have a pending petition for review, or if you were wondering whether you should file a petition for review, know when the government reopens, the MSPB has a quorum and they will be issuing decisions. And there was a quorum. The MSPB did not have a quorum for a number of years, I think 2017 to 2022. And when it did have a quorum, it was able to get through a lot of the petitions for review that were sitting there. Now we've been out without a quorum for at least 6 months. So I would think the MSPB is going to work quickly to get through some of these decisions. So no longer should employees be in fear of not filing petitions for review or filing petitions for review because there is a quorum. I just wanted to note that. And so when the government comes back, comes open, the MSPB will be able to issue decisions. The other note here is that if there were deadlines before the shutdown, then there is not an extension. So if you had a deadline to appeal an adverse action or file an MSPB appeal before October 1st, that deadline was still in place. You would have to show good cause of why you did not file in time if you did not file. So these extension only applies to after the government shutdown. Okay, so moving on to EEO investigations. So these are the investigations of the formal complaints or informal complaints filed by federal employees. These investigations are ongoing. We've seen at our firm notice of rights to file still be issued, meaning those rights to file a formal complaint. Requests for affidavits to support a complaint are still being reviewed and being requested. Rebuttal affidavits. Now, a lot of these EEO investigations are being conducted by contractors employed by the agency. That's why they're allowed to continue. But some agencies still have employees, staff to process these investigations. I think one of the reasons is because the federal regulations are still in place. These agencies still need to complete the investigations within 180 days. And so these interviews of witnesses, interviews of complainants are still ongoing. And you should continue to meet those deadlines if you have them. If you have a deadline to contact the agency to claim discrimination, you still need to contact the agency. For instance, and we're being more specific, federal employees have 45 days from the last action that they knew about, the last discriminatory action, to contact the agency to claim discrimination. Do not wait. Do not think that because the government shut down, I don't need to make contact. Make contact just to be safe, really. Now, it's likely, because this happened before, it's likely the EEOC will extend those dates. However, what did happen in the last shutdown is the deadlines got really confused by a lot of people. And so they were 1 day late or 2 days late or whatnot. So if you have a discrimination claim you want to file it. Contact your agency and do it in writing, or at least send it through mail so there's tracking, so there's proof of it. Just don't call and have nobody pick up and say, okay, I made contact. No, do it in writing. Send an email, send something in the mail. As far as just the private sector, we want to note that here is just the EEOC is closed for the private sector, but you could still file charges of discrimination. So if you are a private sector, if you're not with the federal government, you could still file those charges of discrimination. and still meet those timelines as well, and do so in writing, like I just described. But otherwise, if you did have like an interview or a mediation, those likely were canceled and will be rescheduled after the government reopens. So impact of the shutdown on investigations and the disciplinary process of federal employees. So this is still ongoing as well, for a lot of employees as far as the disciplinary process. As far as the investigation process, there are some suspensions, like we note here, but the disciplinary process seems to be still ongoing, meaning that if we've seen employees receive proposed removals, receive proposed suspensions, and have deadlines, that they have to comply with. So if you have a deadline to respond to a proposed suspension or a proposed removal, comply with that deadline, or at least contact the official who sent you the notice or the deciding official and confirm that deadline's still in place. I know agencies are still conducting verbal replies or replies as well. As far as the investigation, like I said, that's usually been suspended, but still contact the agency official who you're dealing with to see whether there's anything that's needed. But there are still employees that are still processing this. There's still agency attorneys that are still available as well. So overall, I would still comply with any deadlines unless told otherwise. And so as far as the federal courts, I mentioned earlier, but the courts are remaining open and continuing at least through this Friday. And the proceedings and deadlines are occurring as scheduled. Now, if there is an attorney or a key witness that's affected by the shutdown, the courts are rescheduling those dates. They're rescheduling deadlines and so on. But the federal court operates off a electronic case management filing system known as PACER, and that's still open. That's still open for people to file documents there as well. So the federal courts are remaining open even for employment matters, and those deadlines still need to be met. And I think that covers everything we wanted to cover. Thank you.